My name is Hazel Forrester, and for 78 years, this land has been my life. Not just the old farmhouse where the floorboards sing a familiar tune, but every single one of the 200 acres of Blackwater Ridge. To call it mere property feels like a sin. It is more than just soil and timber. It is a living, breathing archive of my family's history, a tapestry woven with sweat, love, and loss. I can walk out past the barn to the northern ridge, where the wind always seems to carry whispers from the past, and I can still see the faint, sunken outline of the original homestead. My great-grandfather, a man whose picture sits on my mantel, built it with his bare hands and the stubborn will of a survivor after the Civil War. He chose this spot because of the creek that snakes through the valley, a constant silvery ribbon of life that has never once, not in the worst droughts I can remember, run dry. I have a photograph of myself as a little girl, no older than 5, standing by that creek with my own grandfather. He was a man as sturdy and steadfast as the ancient oaks he planted to line the long driveway, trees that now form a majestic canopy. He was teaching me how to read the clouds to predict rain, a skill more reliable than any weatherman. He'd hold my small hand in his calloused, warm one and say, "Hazel, this land doesn't belong to us. We belong to it. We're just its keepers for a little while. Our job is to leave it better than we found it." That sentiment soaked into my bones, becoming a part of me, deeper than any deed or title ever could. The farmhouse itself isn't grand, not like the new houses in town, but it's honest. The porch swing, which my late husband Henry built for me on our first anniversary, has a particular gentle groan that has been the soundtrack to my evenings for 50 years. The scent of wild honeysuckle overwhelming the porch in June, the sharp, clean smell of burning oak leaves in October. These aren't just smells. They are the markers of time, the anchors of my entire existence. Henry and I raised our 2 children here. Our son James, a brave boy with his father's smile, was taken from us too soon by a war in a country I couldn't find on a map. Our daughter Emily, Brandon's mother, passed from a sickness that all of modern medicine couldn't touch. Now, it's just me and my nephew Brandon. He lives in the city, a place of relentless concrete and noise that has always felt like a foreign country to me. He visits a few times a year, mostly on holidays. His recent visits have felt brief and increasingly transactional, as if he's checking a box on a list of obligations before rushing back to his real life. I remember last Christmas, he spent most of the afternoon on his phone in the corner, his face illuminated by the screen, while I sat by the fire, feeling more like a piece of the scenery than his family. But this land, this farm, is my last and most profound connection to everyone I've ever loved and lost. Every sunrise that spills like liquid gold over the eastern hills feels like a greeting from my ancestors. Every evening, as the fireflies begin their silent, blinking dance over the hayfields, I feel Henry's presence beside me on the porch swing, his hand in mine. This isn't just property to be appraised and valued in dollars and cents. It is a sanctuary. It is the cradle of my memories and the keeper of my family's soul. The thought of it ever becoming anything else, of bulldozers tearing up the soil that holds my history, was a sacrilege I couldn't bear to contemplate. It was a place to be protected, to be passed on, a legacy of stewardship. I had always believed that Brandon, as my Emily's only son, would one day understand that responsibility. I was wrong, so terribly, devastatingly wrong. The day he arrived in his sleek black car, that looked like a beetle against the rustic backdrop of the farm, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the crisp autumn air. He had a look in his eye I'd never seen before. Not the warmth of familial affection, but the cold, hard glint of ambition. Brandon stepped out of his car, dressed in a tailored dark suit that probably cost more than my property taxes for the entire year. He wasn't carrying the usual box of grocery store donuts or a potted plant. Instead, he held a sleek, expensive-looking leather briefcase. He kissed my cheek, a dry, perfunctory gesture that felt more like a business formality than a greeting from a beloved nephew. "Aunt Hazel," he said, his voice as smooth and polished as the finish on his car. "You're looking well. The country air agrees with you." I offered him iced tea, a habit from years of warmer welcomes, and we sat on the porch. The old swing, Henry's swing, groaned softly under our combined weight. For a few minutes, he engaged in the kind of meaningless small talk that feels designed to fill silence rather than connect people. He asked about the weather, my vegetable garden, and then spoke at length about his busy job in acquisitions, a word that sounded vaguely predatory to me. I could feel a tension in him, a coiled, restless energy waiting to be released. I tried to steer the conversation towards something real. "How is work really, Brandon? Are you happy?" He waved a dismissive hand. "Happy doesn't pay the bills, Aunt Hazel. Successful is what matters." Finally, he set his glass down on the wicker table with a decisive click, the sound sharp in the quiet afternoon. "Aunt Hazel, I came here today to talk about the future," he began, his tone shifting from casual to corporate. "Your future. And well, mine too." He opened his briefcase and, with a flourish, pulled out a stack of glossy brochures. He fanned them out on the table between us, covering a water ring left by my glass. The images were of sterile, identical-looking houses packed tightly together, each with a sliver of unnaturally green lawn and a thin, sad-looking sapling staked out front. The title on the cover, in a slick, modern font, read, "The Ridge at Blackwater, Modern Living, Timeless Value." I stared at the name, a twisted, commercialized version of our family's home, and a cold dread began to seep into my bones, chilling me from the inside out. "Brandon, what in God's name is all this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "This," he said, his smile wide and unnervingly bright, "is progress. It's our future. I've been working on this for months. I've formed an LLC. I've had meetings with major developers. I've even had preliminary zoning inquiries made with the county. This land, Aunt Hazel, it's a gold mine. It's sitting here doing nothing. We could build over 100 luxury homes here. Think of the profit. You'd be set for life. You could move into the finest retirement community in the state, with gourmet meals and a swimming pool. No expense spared. No more worrying about a leaky roof or trying to find someone to mow these fields." He spoke with the breathless excitement of a salesman, as if he were offering me a priceless gift, a release from a prison I didn't even know I was in. He saw the fields my grandfather plowed not as a legacy, but as unused square footage. He saw the creek where I taught Emily to fish, not as a source of life, but as a premium water feature for corner lots. He didn't see a home. He saw a resource to be exploited, an asset to be liquidated. "My home is not for sale, Brandon," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. He just chuckled, a condescending little sound that grated on my nerves. "Don't be sentimental, Aunt Hazel. Sentimentality is a luxury we can't afford. This is a business opportunity, our family's opportunity. It's time to let go of the past and cash in on the future." He was my sister's son, my own blood. But as he spoke, he felt like a complete stranger, a vulture circling over something sacred and pretending to be a songbird. The love I thought we shared was being systematically replaced by the chilling realization that he saw me and our entire shared history as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle. My initial firm refusal did nothing to deter Brandon. If anything, it seemed to energize him, as if my no was just a quaint opening gambit in a negotiation I didn't know we were having. In the weeks that followed, the pressure became a slow, methodical, and suffocating squeeze. At first it was the phone calls, arriving like clockwork every 2 days. They'd start pleasantly enough, him asking about my health in a tone of feigned concern, but would inevitably pivot to the development. He'd use words like legacy, twisting their meaning until they felt ugly and foreign in his mouth. "This is how you build a real legacy, Aunt Hazel," he'd say, his voice a smooth purr of manipulation. "Not with a dusty old farmhouse that's falling down around you, but with real, tangible wealth that can be passed down for generations. This is for the family's future." He meant for his family, of course. My branch of the family tree was, in his eyes, withered and ready to be pruned for kindling. Then the packages started arriving. Not just brochures this time, but thick, intimidating binders and envelopes sent by courier. They contained financial projections filled with dizzying numbers, architectural renderings that showed our ancient oaks replaced with cul-de-sacs named Heritage Lane and Pioneer Court. The most chilling document was a transparent overlay of the proposed development placed on top of an aerial photograph of my farm. I could see my own bedroom, the room where I was born, marked with a red circle and labeled Unit 7B Master Bath. It felt like he was methodically carving up my life on paper, piece by piece, before he'd even taken the land. He sent a market analysis that valued the timber on the property, the livestock I kept more for company than for profit, and the barn itself as individual assets to be liquidated. It was a cold, brutal autopsy of my home. The worst part was his tone. It was a masterclass in condescension, cloaked in a thin, transparent veil of concern. "I know this is a lot for you to handle, Aunt Hazel," he'd say, his voice dripping with false sympathy that made my skin crawl. "You're getting on in years, and a property this size is a huge burden. I'm just trying to help you, to unburden you from all this stress." He made me sound like a frail, senile old woman, incapable of managing her own affairs, a doddering relic standing stubbornly in the way of his brilliant vision. One Saturday, he showed up unannounced, this time with a man in a polo shirt and clipboard, a surveyor. "Just getting a preliminary look at the topography for the drainage plans," Brandon said breezily, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to have a stranger marching through my vegetable garden, my private sanctuary, taking measurements and hammering stakes into the ground. I stood on the porch, my arms crossed so tightly my knuckles were white, feeling invaded and utterly powerless. "Brandon, I have asked you to stop," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I could no longer contain. "This is disrespectful. This is my home." He had the audacity to look hurt, to act as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Disrespectful? I'm trying to make us millions of dollars. You're being emotional, Aunt Hazel. This is about logic, not sentiment. When are you going to understand? At the end of the day, it's just a piece of dirt." That line, "just a piece of dirt," echoed in my head long after his car had disappeared down the driveway, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. He had finally said it. He had stripped Blackwater Ridge of all its history, all its love, all its life, and reduced it to its most basic, worthless component in his eyes: dirt. It was an insult so profound, so complete, that it clarified everything. He didn't just want the farm, he wanted to erase everything it stood for. The final confrontation happened on a cold, gray Tuesday in late November. The sky was the color of slate, and a bitter wind rattled the old window panes, a perfect mirror for the storm brewing inside my heart. Brandon called ahead, his voice devoid of any pretense of warmth or patience. "I'm coming over, Aunt Hazel, and I'm bringing the final papers. My lawyer, Mr. Reed, will be with me. We need to get this done." He arrived not with a briefcase, but with a thin, menacing-looking legal folio. He didn't even bother with pleasantries, marching straight into the kitchen where I was peeling apples for a pie, an act of defiant normalcy. He slapped the folio down on the old wooden table where my mother had once taught my sister Emily to knead dough. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "All right," he said, his jaw tight. "I've been patient. I've tried to be reasonable. I have tried to make you see the logic, but my investors are getting antsy, and you're holding everything up." He pulled a chair out, scraping it loudly against the worn linoleum, and sat down, staring at me with cold, impatient eyes that held no trace of the boy I once knew. I placed the peeler and knife down carefully on the counter, wiping my hands on my apron. "Brandon, my answer has not changed. I have told you. The answer is no." His face hardened, the thin mask of the concerned nephew finally melting away completely to reveal the predator beneath. "No? No is not an option anymore. Look at you," he said, gesturing around the room with a sweep of his hand that dismissed my entire life. "Living in the past, this place is falling apart. The roof needs work, the fences are sagging. You're old. What are you going to do? Live here until you die and just let it all rot? That's selfish. It's incredibly selfish of you to sit on a gold mine out of stubbornness." The word selfish hit me like a physical blow. I, who had dedicated my life to preserving this place for the family, for him, was being called selfish by the one person trying to destroy it for his own avarice. "This farm is our heritage," I said, my voice trembling but gaining strength. "It was meant for my children and then for you. It's for the family." I am the family, he shot back, his voice rising to a near shout. I'm the one with a future, with kids who need college funds, not some romantic notions about dirt and dead trees. Your mother, my mother, Emily, she would have wanted this for me. She would have wanted me to be successful. Using my daughter's memory as a weapon against me was the cruelest cut of all. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, threatening growl. Sign the damn papers, Aunt Hazel. Do the one useful thing you have left to do and sign it over. Or I'll start looking into other ways. Legal ways. I've spoken to my lawyer. We can file a petition for conservatorship. We can declare you incompetent to manage your own assets. We'll get doctors to testify. It can get very, very ugly. Don't make it get ugly. There it was. The threat behind the smile, the cruelty behind the concern, laid bare for me to see. He wasn't asking. He was demanding. He was threatening to strip me of my home, my dignity, and my very sanity. All for his soulless housing development. He saw me as a faulty mechanism in his grand machine, a problem to be solved, not a person to be respected. As I looked at my sister's son, I didn't see any family resemblance. I saw only a stranger consumed by greed. And in that moment of profound hurt and betrayal, a new kind of resolve, cold and sharp as a shard of winter ice, began to form within me. He had underestimated me. He saw a frail old woman. He was about to meet a matriarch protecting her legacy. After Brandon and his lawyer left, a profound silence fell over the house, a silence that felt heavier and more oppressive than any I'd ever known. His threats hung in the air like toxic smoke, choking the familiar comfort of my home. Incompetent, selfish, the one useful thing you have left to do. The words were meticulously chosen, designed to break me, to make me feel small, ancient, and utterly powerless. And for a little while, sitting there in the echoing quiet, they did. I walked from room to room, touching the furniture, running my hand along the worn wallpaper. I stopped in the living room and looked at the pencil marks on the doorframe, charting the growth of James and Emily. I imagined a demolition crew tearing it all down, turning those precious marks into splinters and dust. The anger that had been simmering inside me for weeks began to boil. It wasn't a hot, messy anger, but a clean, righteous fire. My grandfather's words came back to me, clear as if he were standing right there. We're just its keepers. I was the keeper, and I was failing my post. Brandon was right about one thing. I couldn't just let the farm rot after I was gone. If he was the only family left, what would happen? His threat of declaring me incompetent was terrifying, but the thought of him inheriting the farm and immediately selling it to his developers was a fate worse than death. My entire life's work of preservation would be for nothing. The thought was unbearable. I needed a new plan, a permanent one. I needed a way to protect the farm, not just from Brandon, but from anyone like him, forever. I went into the study, a room Henry had filled with books on history, agriculture, and nature. I ran my fingers along the dusty spines, searching for some kind of guidance, an answer from the past. My hand stopped on a thick, leather-bound book about local county history. I pulled it down, and a folded, yellowed piece of paper slipped out, an old newspaper clipping from maybe 20 years ago. The headline read, "Bowman's Field Saved from Mall Developers, Donated to County Historical Society." I remembered the story. I had known the Bowman family slightly. A large corporation had wanted to build a shopping mall on their historic pasture land. The elderly matriarch, much like me, had refused to sell. To ensure it was never threatened again after she was gone, she had donated the entire property to the County Historical Society, placing a conservation easement on it that legally and permanently protected it from any future development. It would remain a public park, a piece of local history preserved for everyone to enjoy. A light went on in my mind, a brilliant, audacious, and beautiful idea. If I couldn't trust my own family to be the keepers of the flame, I would find someone who could. The Historical Society. They didn't see land as profit. They saw it as a story to be told and retold. They would honor the original homestead, the ancient oaks, the creek where Henry taught our son to skip stones. They would see its value not in the number of houses you could build, but in the number of generations it had sustained. The plan was a final, absolute checkmate. By giving the farm away, I would save it. Brandon wanted me to sign it over, and I would. Just not to him. A slow, determined smile spread across my face for the first time in weeks. He wanted a legacy of wealth? I would give him a legacy of loss. I would rob him of the prize so completely, and in doing so, I would fulfill my true duty as the keeper of Blackwater Ridge. I would protect it forever. The very next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose that felt like a jolt of electricity. The despair was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. The first call I made was to Mr. Finch, a lawyer in town whose father had been my father's lawyer. Thomas Finch was a kind, steady man who had known me my whole life and understood the farm's significance went far beyond its acreage. I didn't have to waste time explaining the sentimental value. He already knew the stories of the place. When I laid out my audacious plan over the phone, there was a long, thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. "Hazel," he finally said, his voice a mixture of surprise and profound admiration. "That is quite the move. A masterstroke, if I may say so. Are you absolutely certain this is the path you want to take?" "I have never been more certain of anything in my life, Thomas," I replied, my voice firm and clear. "My nephew sees a stack of cash when he looks at my home. I see my family's soul. I want to protect it, permanently." He told me to come in the next day, and to bring the deed. When I arrived at his comfortable wood-paneled office, he had already pulled the relevant statutes on charitable donations, land trusts, and conservation easements. He treated me not as a frail old woman to be placated, but as a savvy, determined client with a clear objective. He listened patiently as I detailed Brandon's threats, his face growing sterner with every word. "This is entirely feasible, and frankly, it's brilliant," he confirmed, tapping a pen on a legal pad. "We'll need to draft a new deed, a formal letter of donation, and work directly with the society to establish the precise terms of the easement. We can specify that the farmhouse must be maintained in its period state, that the land cannot be commercially developed, and that it should be used for historical and educational purposes." My second call was to the County Historical Society. I spoke to a warm, energetic woman named Dr. Powell, the director. When I told her what I was proposing to donate, 200 acres of continuously farmed land with an original pre-1900s farmhouse and barn still standing, she was momentarily speechless. There was a crackle on the line before she found her voice. "Mrs. Forrester," she stammered, "are you serious? A property like that? A place like Blackwater Ridge? It's a living museum. It would be the crown jewel of our county's preservation efforts." She came out to the farm the following day. Unlike Brandon, who only saw dollar signs, Dr. Powell saw history in every detail. Her eyes lit up with genuine excitement as I showed her the hand-hewn beams in the barn, the spot where the old smokehouse used to be, my grandmother's journals I kept in the attic. She spoke with sincere passion about creating educational programs for schoolchildren, hosting historical reenactments, and working with the state university to preserve the native flora along the creek. "We would be honored to be the keepers of this legacy," she said, her voice filled with a reverence that soothed my wounded heart. Over the next 2 weeks, Mr. Finch and Dr. Powell worked with remarkable speed and discretion. The paperwork they drafted was a stark contrast to the predatory documents Brandon had shoved at me. These were papers of preservation, not destruction. They were a shield, forged in secret, ready for the final battle. I even called Brandon. I told him I needed some time to get my affairs in order, a phrase he interpreted with smug satisfaction, assuming I was capitulating. "Of course, Aunt Hazel," he'd said, his voice dripping with false patience. "Take your time. I know it's a big emotional step." His condescension was almost comical now that I held all the cards. I was no longer a victim waiting for the axe to fall. I was the architect of his downfall and the savior of my home. Brandon called on a Thursday, his voice brimming with triumphant finality. "I've booked a notary to come to the house tomorrow at 10 a.m., he announced, not asked. "My lawyer, Mr. Reed, will be there as well to make sure everything is clean and indisputable. Be ready, Aunt Hazel." The sheer arrogance in his voice was staggering. He was planning his own victory party in my home, at my dining room table. "I'll be ready, Brandon," I said, a calm, quiet smile on my face that he couldn't see. The next morning, I was indeed ready. I had my own papers, prepared by Mr. Finch, signed and witnessed the day before, tucked neatly inside a simple manila envelope on the kitchen table. Right on time, Brandon's gleaming black car crunched up the gravel driveway, followed by another, carrying his lawyer and a nervous-looking notary. Brandon strode onto the porch like a conquering hero returning from war. "Morning, Aunt Hazel! Big day!" he boomed, clapping his hands together as if to applaud himself. He introduced his lawyer, the same sharp-faced Mr. Reed, who gave me a curt, dismissive nod. They set up at the large dining room table, the very one my family had shared countless holiday meals at. Mr. Reed laid out their contract, a thick stack of papers that would sign away Blackwater Ridge to Brandon's LLC for a token sum of $1, with the rest of my compensation vaguely promised from the future profits of the development. "It's all standard," Reed said dismissively, not even looking at me as he gestured for me to sit. "You'll just sign here, here, and initial here." Brandon was practically vibrating with excitement, a smug, triumphant grin plastered on his face. He was tasting his victory, savoring it. I sat down and looked at the pile of papers, then looked straight at him. "You know, Brandon," I said slowly, my voice even, "you were right about one thing. It's time for me to sign the farm over. It's too much for one person to manage, and its future needs to be secured." A wave of visible relief washed over his face. "Exactly. I knew you'd see reason. I knew you'd do the right thing in the end." "So," I continued, pushing his thick contract aside with the back of my hand, sending it sliding across the polished wood. I had my own lawyer draw up some papers to do just that. I picked up my thin envelope and slid it across the table toward his lawyer. "I've decided to sign the farm over, effective immediately." Brandon's lawyer, Reed, picked up the document. His professional curiosity piqued. He began to read. Brandon was still smiling, assuming it was just some formality on my end. Perhaps a list of sentimental items I wanted to keep. I watched Reed's face as his eyes scanned the first page. His eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. He read it again, his mouth falling slightly open. He looked from the paper to me with an expression of pure shock, then back to the paper in disbelief. "What is it?" Brandon asked impatiently. "Is there a problem? Get on with it." Reed swallowed hard, his professional composure crumbling. "Brandon," he said, his voice suddenly strained and quiet. "This is a fully executed deed of donation, a charitable gift. She's already signed the entire property, the house, the land, everything, over to the County Historical Society." The grin on Brandon's face froze, then shattered like a pane of glass. He snatched the paper from his lawyer's hand. His eyes darted frantically across the page, his face turning from a confident tan to a sickly pale to a blotchy, furious red. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, counting down the seconds of his defeat. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice shaking with a mixture of confusion and rage. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said calmly, my voice clear and strong, resonating with the authority of generations. "You wanted me to sign over the farm to protect its legacy, so I did. I have donated it, in its entirety, to be preserved forever. It is now, and will be for all time, a protected historical site. It is untouchable." Brandon stared at the single piece of paper in his hand as if it were a venomous snake that had just bitten him. The color drained from his face, replaced by a dark, mottled rage that twisted his features into something ugly. He looked up at me, his eyes wild with a mixture of disbelief and pure fury. "You can't do this!" he hissed, the words barely escaping his clenched teeth. "This is our family's money, my children's future. You've just thrown away millions and millions of dollars." "No, Brandon," I said, my voice as steady and unyielding as the stone foundation of the house. "I haven't thrown anything away. I have saved it. Money is not the only thing of value in this world, a lesson you have sadly never learned. This farm has a value you are clearly incapable of understanding. It's a legacy of hard work, of love, of survival through droughts and storms and wars. It is not, and never will be, a development opportunity." His lawyer, Mr. Reed, was already packing his expensive briefcase, wanting no part of the messy emotional fallout. "The documents appear to be legally sound and properly executed, Brandon," he muttered, studiously avoiding eye contact with either of us. "It's her property. She can do with it as she wishes." "You spiteful, bitter old woman," Brandon screamed, finally losing the last shred of his composure. He slammed his fist on the dining room table, the table Henry had refinished, making the silverware in the sideboard rattle a final, mournful tune. "You did this just to hurt me, to ruin me." "No," I said, standing up to my full height and looking down on him for the first time in my life. "I did this to protect our family's heritage from you. You demanded I sign over the farm, so I did. You just never thought to ask who I'd be signing it over to. You saw a frail, emotional old woman you could bully and manipulate. You underestimated me." He was speechless, sputtering, his grand vision of the ridge at Blackwater dissolving into smoke before his very eyes. He had lost, completely, finally, and irrevocably. He stormed out of the house without another word, his lawyer trailing nervously behind him. The slam of his car door echoed across the fields, a final, jarring note, and then it was gone, leaving only peace in its wake. A few weeks later, a modest, tasteful sign was installed at the end of the long driveway. It read, "Blackwater Ridge, a historical property of the County Historical Society, protected for all future generations, open to the public." Dr. Powell and a team of smiling volunteers came by. They didn't come with bulldozers and blueprints, but with notebooks and cameras, eager to catalog every piece of history, every story held within these walls. They asked me to stay on as the resident curator, to live in my home for as long as I wished, to be the one who shared its stories with the world. I often sit on the porch swing now, Henry's swing, and watch families and school groups walk the trails that have been cleared through the woods. I listen to guides talk about my great-grandfather and the hardships he faced. My nephew has never called or visited again. He lost his financial inheritance, but he had already lost his humanity long before that. I didn't leave him a fortune in cash. I left him a lesson in humility, though I doubt he'll ever learn it. My true inheritance wasn't his to receive. It belongs to everyone now, and as the sun sets over the untouched hills of Blackwater Ridge, I touch the arm of the swing Henry built, and I feel a profound, unshakable sense of peace. I fulfilled my duty. I was a good keeper,